We are shifting now to our first keynote address of this conference, which I'm really excited about. And our speaker is Osheta Moore, podcaster, blogger, everyday peacemaker, and outreach and teaching pastor at Woodland Hills Church in St. Paul, Minnesota. And Osheta has described herself in some of her writing as an Assembly of God, Methodist, Southern Baptist-tarian turned Anabaptist. She's the author of 2 Herald Press books, Shalom, Sistas, Living Wholeheartedly in a Brokenhearted World from 2017, and Dear White Peacemakers, Dismantling Racism with Grit and Grace. And that book is soon to be released. And actually, Osheta will be leaving us at the end of her talk this afternoon so she can continue to work on her book or other related materials. So I first became aware of Osheta while reading her columns in Mennonite World Review a number of years ago. And I found myself drawn to her voice, her honesty and straightforwardness, her clear-eyed way of addressing difficult truths, especially related to racism and injustice, her deep compassion for our broken world, her groundedness in her faith, and her identity as a peacemaker. I attended a seminar she gave at a Mennonite convention, and I heard her preach at a conference earlier this year at AMBS, which was just the week before the pandemic shutdown began. And I'm very excited that she's here to share her perspectives and insights with us. And so with that, I will turn it over to you, Osheta. And just a note also that if we could wait to put any comments in the chat until Osheta finishes speaking, there will be a time for question and answers at the end. But if you can hold your question until then it won't be distracting us as we listen to Osheta, and then we will be sure not to miss them when she gets to the Q&A time. So welcome, Osheta, and thank you for coming.
Of course, thanks for having me, Annette. Hey, everyone. Okay, so we are going to cover a lot in our time together, because if there's anything that I love talking more about than peacemaking, it's peacemaking and social media. I have a little handle. I say I like to practice social media shalom. And so that's what we're going to be exploring today. And we're actually going to I'm going to show you some things, one thing that I've done online and how I practice social media shalom. And then I'm going to be having a Q&A time at the end of this, since I'm not going to be able to come back to the conversation time. Most of my talk today is going to be just sort of my general rules and strategies for practicing peace online, but they're not going to be as racially specific as maybe some of you might be interested in learning, like specifically how do we post about race, or what are some things to talk about race. So if there's any of those questions that you have, I'm going to invite you to kind of ask those questions during our Q&A time if there's like a specific question about that, because practicing anti-racism is an extension of my peacemaking that I've found that I've fallen into as we've had more and more conversations, primarily online, around race and how can we bring our peacemaking ethic to dismantling racism. Between the things like Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd happening in such quick succession in the midst of COVID-19, that is a conversation that a lot of our followers want us to be a part of and want to hear from us. And they really do want us to bring the good news, the beautiful picture of Christ's peace and his enemy love, and his dream of shalom. But a lot of us don't know how to do that. So that's going to be part of the conversation we can have in the Q&A time, if you're interested. Okay, so let me go ahead and share my screen with you. And this is always the tricky part. Like, do I know how to use Zoom? Have I figured all of the tricks and tips out? So I hope that you can see my screen. I'm going to go ahead and start our presentation from the beginning. So we are going to be, the title of my talk today is We Will Tell Better Stories, Social Media Peacemaking. And a little bit about our goals. I kind of gave you a little bit of the lay of the land, but just more specifically, we're going to examine the concept of social media as a practice of peacemaking and not just another thing that's on our to-do list as communicators. We're going to explore social media shalom strategies, and then we're going to analyze one social media post on racial reconciliation. Just a little bit about me before we go on. Thank you, Annette, for that really beautiful introduction. This is my family. We live in St. Paul, Minnesota. This was a really freezing day in Minneapolis. My daughter actually this is my daughter, Trinity. She actually had strep and we didn't know. And she still like showed up for the photo shoot. My husband and I are both pastors. My husband pastors a small church in the Twin Cities called Roots Covenant. He's an ordained pastor with the Evangelical Covenant Church denomination. And I serve as outreach and teaching pastor at Woodland Hills, which is a larger church that is a neo-Anabaptist community. If any of you are familiar with Greg Boyd, that's the church where he pastors. We have 3 teenagers, so please pray for me in the midst of all of this. This is my oldest, Hyson. He just turned 18. Like I said, there's my daughter, Trinity. She's 14. And that's my son, TJ. He's 15. And this is who I do life with. This is who I am primarily practicing peacemaking with. And having teenagers and in this weird time has really forced me to be aware of like what goes on online, how to engage online, how to help them be better online. And if you had asked me, you know, maybe 11 years, if this was something I would be interested in, I would say no. Like the internet feels like a Wild West where everybody is prepared for a gunfight with their words. The comment sections are dangerous. It's terrible. I never want to do anything online. But my husband noticed that I had a lot of words about a lot of things I was passionate about, and he was tired of hearing me rant. And so he said, maybe you should start a blog, and maybe you should start, you know, sharing some of these ideas online. And so when I started my blog, it started out as Shalom in the City, because I was really taken by the idea of the city of God and the concept of the kingdom of God and how do we live out God's dream of shalom right where we are. Also, my husband and I have been doing urban ministry together for 20 years, so I really care about the city. When I started my blog Shalom in the City, I had one kind of goal, and I would do this often. I would write a post, and then I would have like a little paragraph of ground rules of how, if anybody wants to engage in this post in the comment section, like here are the things that we're going to hold fast to, and here are my rules for deleting comments. And I don't want to say like I was the first to do that, but like I hadn't seen that happen anyplace else. But it was really, really important to me to cultivate a space where we could have dialogue and we can share ideas, and I can maybe say some hard things or some new things that people hadn't thought about, but I could say it from a place of love, and then I could maintain a conversation of dignity and respect and love. But really, like, you can blame this guy for me being as passionate about social media as I am. So there is a book that I really think it has been incredibly helpful in me thinking about my responsibility with social media. And it's this book by Eric Qualman, Socialnomics. He has this great quote, which I think so many of us as communicators, especially in the online space, we recognize that we really don't have a choice on whether we do social media. The question is, how do we do it? That is truly the question of like, what does it look like for us to jump on social media, to use it as a tool of peacemaking, to not be afraid of it, but to actually bring something powerful and true and good when we enter in that space. In my first book, Shalom, Sistas, I talk about how the concept of God's shalom really grounds me. I define shalom as God's dream of the world as it should be, nothing broken, nothing missing, everything made whole. I really like Brueggemann's picture of shalom as multidimensional, multi-directional, of loyalty and justice and flourishing and harmony and wholeness and goodness. And so when I think of my particular calling to be a peacemaker, I have one of the manifestos in the book for me being a peacemaker in Shalom, Sistas, is we will tell better stories. So I really view myself as a good storyteller. As somebody who, when I enter into any space that I'm in, that I am the one that brings the good news or a good idea or a good perspective, or maybe I say a hard thing with good intention behind it, that I look for the goodness of people when I am engaging. So the first kind of half of this talk is going to be really like, what is our own posture when we deal with social media? What's our fears? How do we kind of become confident in entering in that space? And then the second half is going to be more strategies for our organization. because I have learned that it's inevitable with social media that there can be conflict, there can be misunderstanding. It is a place ripe for a lot of hatred, ripe for being an outlet for people's anxiety and fear. I think that part of the reason why we are seeing so much divisiveness and polarization in our culture, in our countries, is because social media has allowed us to kind of separate people from their ideas, and treat people terribly because we maybe disagree with their ideas. And the dehumanizing aspect of people only being a username or being a comment or being a check mark or being a like has really facilitated that. And so for me, when I think of how I want to do social media, I want to be the person that reclaims humanity. So one thing that I say as a peacemaker, that peacemakers are simply the ones who rehumanize those who have been dehumanized. And that is no different when I am entering into an online space. Many of us don't have the option to do what some say, or it's like, I'm just going to abstain. I'm just not going to do it. All of us as communicators have to learn how to be peacemakers in the wild, wild west. And this really does kind of lean into our picture of Isaiah 49 that is kind of grounding and inspiring this conference today. I'm just going to read it for us. You who bring good news to Zion, go up on a high mountain. You who bring good news to Jerusalem, lift up your voice with a shout. Lift it up, do not be afraid. Say to the towns of Judah, here is your God. I can't think of any better way to point people to who God is, the truest character of God, than to ground my work, my communication in the peace ethic of God, to center everything that I do around the concept of shalom, God's dream for the world as it should be. This is our way of, when we enter into online spaces and we think of ourselves as being a peacemaker, we can bring good news. We can be the ones to say, this is what God looks like. Because I can tell you this, if I post something online that may be, that I think is really, really good news, that I think is like really snappy, really sharp, a really great meme, but it doesn't inspire any goodness, it doesn't inspire any hope, it doesn't invite people to know God better and to shape their lives around the way of Jesus, if it doesn't do any of that, then it really is just the thing that we think of often with most influencers. It's just self-aggrandizement. It's just self-centeredness. But we actually get to be the ones who bring the peace of Jesus whenever we enter into online spaces. And this is part of our calling. If we identify as peacemakers, if Jesus is our Prince of Peace all the time, this really is our calling. And I really love this description from Lisa Sharon Harper of Shalom. She said that God created the world in a web of relationships that overflowed with forceful goodness. Now, how many of us have read an article or seen a post or watched a video and it was forceful, like it got our attention, like it was absolute 1000% clickbait. But then when we got into it, it didn't invite any life-giving conversation. It maybe just called out, but never truly called in. We get to be the ones who craft blog posts and articles and a social media strategy of forceful goodness, because that was God's intention, that we view this world as relational and that we bring goodness with us. We are the ones that God has chosen to partner with to bring this forceful goodness in our relationships, even in the World Wide Web. So we're going to look at two passages that have helped me form my 5 responses to the dilemma of social media peacemaking, and really build my ethos around how I engage with social media. And I really hope that you leave this time just empowered to use your voice on social media to bring God's shalom right where you are, and for all of your followers on social media. So let's look at these 2 passages. So the first passage that I really think about is Romans 14:17-20. For the kingdom of God is not a matter of eating and drinking, but of righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit. Because anyone who serves Christ in this way is pleasing to God and receives human approval. So a couple of things. Whenever I talk about righteousness, I'm not only talking about like our own personal right relatedness to God, our own personal connection to God, and feeling like we've been seen, we've been forgiven, we are loved by God. When I talk about righteousness, I also talk about the social relational aspect of righteousness, right relatedness with others, being the ones who speak about what does it look like for the world to be rightly related for people in the world to be rightly related with each other. So that's where a lot of the time, I don't want to be somebody that talks about racism or hard things in our country. I don't want to be the one that talks about that. But sometimes in order for me to be right related with my brother and sisters, I have to be honest and I have to speak about those social dynamics. But I recognize that is an aspect of my being a peacemaker, because as much as it's important for this right relatedness between me and God, out of this overflow, then I desire right relatedness with others. And we get to be the ones to, again, rehumanize others by using our voice for that right relatedness. The other scripture that I hold in my mind as I am thinking about my social media posture is John 13:34. A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. So because of these two passages, when I approach social media online, I approach it with two main goals. The first is to pursue peace by building others up. So if I call something out on social media, if there is there's another hashtag of a Black person who has been killed unjustly, as much as often as I've seen people call that out and express their anger, and even call for things like justice or arrests or things like that, my goal is to highlight the human aspect of that issue by recognizing that there are so many people involved in that. And so I ask myself, how do I build up others? How do I call out those who might be hurting the most, as opposed to calling out those who might be being heaped on a ton because of what the issue is exposing. So you will usually see me, if something happens online, first talk about maybe the communities who are grieving, talk about the churches that are grieving, like when the Charleston 9 shooting happened. You'll first hear me talking about that aspect of like entering into a space of like, how do we lift up those who have been hurt the most? And then maybe later on, we'll start having conversations about like, what does justice, what does righteousness look like? And so how then can we, what are the next steps we can do? But the first thing you'll always see me is pursuing peace by building others up. And then the other is always remember that I'm doing this as an act of love, that I love my followers, that I love the Lord, that I am beloved. And so out of all of that overflow, like I want my posts to be as inviting into that love, because the love of God is what transforms people's hearts. And allows us to have more civil and maybe even life-giving conversations as we discourse these kind of things on social media. So these are the two kind of things that I hold on to. When you hear me talk about social media and my hopes for practicing peace on social media, you might be thinking like, wow, like you must be one of these millennials who like love social media and use it all the time. But I'm actually not. I'm like a zennial. I'm like that small group of people that like remember landlines and payphones, and Jif was like a really delicious name brand peanut butter that my mom bought when we had a coupon. It wasn't a moving picture. I am such a late adopter to social media. So much so that like, I remember one time my husband said to me like, hey, you should sign up for Facebook because then you can have all your friends online. And I was like, I have plenty of friends in real life. Why do I need online friends? I just could not even understand it. But for me, entering into this space, even though I had a lot of apprehension, choosing to come to this space with these scriptures in mind, with the two goals of pursuing peace and being an agent of shalom and being someone who brings love and humanizing others in these conversations. As I bring these goals to it, I have truly seen social media become a place where hearts are changed, people are moved into action. People are responding to organizations that I'm excited about, that are doing good peacemaking work. They're giving, they're signing up for newsletters, they're starting dialogues with them. One woman that I know personally joined the board of a nonprofit that I shared about a lot online, and primarily because she had never thought about this organization before, but because of something I had written a long time ago, that she was like, this is somebody who I really want to follow. She followed me for a long time. And then when I shared about this organization, she said, oh my gosh, that's exactly something I want to know about. I would have never known about it if you hadn't shared it with me. And now she's on their board. And so for me, like doing this work of addressing my posture and knowing like why I'm doing social media I've really seen it have benefits in the way people engage online. So here are kind of 5 things that I tell myself before I post anything on social media that helps me kind of identify like where my heart is. Am I able to live into these 2 scriptures? And this is really in line with like, I will tell better stories. So my 5 responses to be a social media peacemaker. The first is, my worth is not defined by social media updates or reactions. That is the hardest one, especially as communicators, especially if our job has anything like marketing manager or social media manager. Like seriously, I've said, how do you manage people you don't see? That is wild. We have to be really, really careful to know that that likes and response and signups and dollars, like these are good indicators of the kind of culture we're building. But our worth, the value of the organization we're a part of, and our own worth, our own ability to cultivate conversations, that doesn't define who we are. We are beloved, and we regardless of anything we do online. Anything we post online, that doesn't change. We actually, out of the overflow of our belovedness, get to do this work online, but we have to be super careful that our worth is not defined by it. So for me, I have to be really, really careful that when I look at any kind of likes or anything like that, I try to think of that's an indication that people are feeling called in, not an indication that people love me or want me or desire me. I've had to kind of do that work. And so for me, that's really helpful, because then I can kind of look at if I post something and it didn't get as many likes, I can then ask myself, not what's wrong with you, but how is that not helpful? Or how can I have said this idea in a way that would have been more helpful to more people? So kind of separating that has helped me define how I engage and kind of set good boundaries around my own identity and my own worth, so that I can actually use my social media account to be a blessing to others. The next thing that I remember is that there is a person behind the post. So when I first started writing my blog, I actually, the first few people who commented that were not like my mom and my pastor, the first few people that I commented, I would put their names up and I would write maybe next to their write their comment next to them. Some of them like I knew maybe in other places because I maybe followed them someplace else, or I was in a group with them and they came and they checked out what I posted online. So I would like put like a little bit of information about them. That has been really helpful for me to identify who is my audience. Who are the people that are drawn to the kind of things I'm saying, who are engaging with my content? And then that helps me think about the content that I want to create a little bit more down the road. So if I know that I am writing to somebody who is living in Des Moines, Iowa, and she's a single woman and she is trying to figure out like, what does peacemaking look like when she's on a budget? I'm not going to post like, hey, take this trip to Thailand to go build bamboo libraries. I wouldn't post anything like that to say like, this is how you can practice peace, because I know that doesn't speak to this particular person. The other thing that I remember is that when I post something, that there are people who are reading that, who are bringing their own baggage, their own stories, their own experiences. There are complex people on the other side of the screen or on the other side of the phone. And so for me, that kind of takes some of the pressure off of me, that I can't speak to every single person. And if somebody posts something negative or hateful on something I post, it allows me to really practice enemy love towards them. And I define my enemy as not somebody that I hate, or that or that is like diametrically opposed to me, because we don't really talk in the way of enemy. Like, we don't say like, she's my mortal enemy. I define an enemy as somebody who's just beyond my empathy, who I am unwilling to offer empathy towards. And so if I remember that there are people behind the post, if somebody posts something terrible about me or tweets something terrible about me, I'm able to offer empathy to them, because I recognize they are a whole person that's bringing a whole lot of stuff to that comment. And usually they're not even responding to me, they're just letting off steam. The next thing is, I want to authentically connect before I attempt to correct. Now, this is more of like a one-on-one kind of interaction, but this may be helpful if maybe you're a comment moderator. Like my husband moderates for several groups, and so he gets in there in the comment section, and sometimes he has to correct people and say like, you're wrong. So one of the things that I typically do is, if I post something that somebody disagrees with, and then they go and post like something that they disagree with me, and they're not super kind or nuanced about the way they disagree with me, I usually take that offline. So first I take it to a DM and I say, hey, thanks for commenting. Would you like to have a little more of a conversation about this here in the DMs? I take it off of that comment section, because one thing that I've learned is that negativity will spread if I don't deal with it immediately. So I usually comment to them and say, hey, I DM'd you. And then I say, do you want to have a conversation here in DM? If that conversation, I have a 3 response rule. If that conversation goes back and forth 3 times and they still have questions, I give them my Google number. So I have a number that's specifically set up so that I can talk people through anything that they disagree with me online. At that point, that's really me just trying to humanize somebody that I've gone back and forth with online a little bit more. Not a whole lot of people take me up on that, but I've had the best conversations with people who take me up on that Google phone call. But that for me is, again, that's the practice of me rehumanizing those who can be dehumanized because of the form of social media. The form social media takes, which is just pixels and comments. I always say there are people behind the pixels. I want to talk about how to use unfriend, unfollow, and block. This may be different for, again, this might be specifically if you are moderating like your organization's Facebook page or something like that. I usually use them as a peace building tool and not a punishment. When I've moderated a few groups, and I usually nip this in the bud by doing what I used to do on my blog, by posting in the about part of the Facebook page, like, hey, like, this is who we are. Here's our standard for communicating online. If you break these rules, you get 3 strikes, and then you're no longer a part of this group. So I usually nip that in the bud. But I also have this is also kind of like my own personal strategy for when I am engaging with somebody in my personal life who disagrees with me. I use it as a way to set up healthy boundaries, and it's not as a punishment. And I almost always communicate with them prior to unfollow or unfriending or blocking them, to say like, hey, this is kind of where we're heading if we can't figure out how to have good dialogue with each other online. And that's really for me rooted in Romans 12:17-18, to just not repay anyone evil for evil. Sorry about the typo. Carefully considering what is right in the eyes of everybody. And if it's possible on your part, live at peace with everyone. And so that's really, truly how I try to live into that. And then the last thing is, as social media breaks are really, really good, especially not just for us individually, but it's really good for organizations to have spaces where they say, hey, we are taking a break for this week, or hey, we encourage you, we don't post over the weekend. We encourage you to read this resource or watch this video or spend time with your family this way. It's really, really good for there to be as many reminders and encouragements from social media influencers on taking breaks. There is a massive addiction to social media that has caused incredible anxiety, that has exacerbated mental health, that has really done just a whammy on our intrinsic sense of belovedness. And so it's really, really good for us to even work into, I use a tool called Planoly to plan out my social media editorial calendar. And I work in taking a break. If you look on my Instagram account, you'll see different pictures that I put up, and I say like pausing or taking a break. And it's not to be like, hey, look how great I am. I'm Sabbathing, and I'm so super close to Jesus, and I'm going to go and pray and be alone now. It really is to show everyone that I am not defined by what I post on social media, and you don't need to be defined by what you're consuming on social media. But also it's a chance for me to kind of put in like, here's something that you can do that's offline to feel more human. Also, studies have shown that taking regular breaks from social media contributes to better sleep, less stress, comparison reduction, more meaningful social interactions in your real life, and stronger self-control. So I want to show you a video. I don't know. Let's see if it'll play here. If it won't play, then I'll pull it up. This is a video that I posted that for me is a really good picture of kind of how I do social media. This happened in 2016. Philando Castile was a man who was pulled over on a routine traffic stop with his girlfriend and his girlfriend's baby. And as he was reaching for his gun permit to show the police officer, he was shot. And his girlfriend had the presence of mind to jump on to Facebook Live and record the whole thing. And I had just seen it, and I had spent the whole day just looking online at organizations that I loved, influencers that I followed, groups that I was a part of predominantly white people, and like nobody was saying anything about it. So there was a whole part of my social media where people were talking about it, but then the places that I looked to for encouragement, nobody was really talking about it. And so I posted this video. And what you'll see is really kind of how I build my social media platform. Is I try to be authentic, I try to be honest, I try to be helpful, but I try to say what's true. And so let's take a look at this video. And it really is like a phone video. Like I went outside and just like pulled my phone up. So and these are honestly, like, people tend to respond better to these, like, to videos that you kind of make authentically than like the really super well produced ones, what I've learned. So let's see if this plays.
Hey everyone, so I'm sitting outside because I am tired of my kids seeing me cry about what's been going on in our country. And I've been thinking a lot about what has been most helpful right now for me as I've been processing this, because I'm in a unique position where I am a part of a very diverse community, racially diverse community. I'm in an interracial marriage, so I understand a lot of the sort of nuances, I guess you could say. I try very hard to listen to both sides in whatever situation I enter in. That's kind of my posture as a peacemaker, is to listen to both sides. But then specifically with this race issue, because both sides are represented in my family, I listen, I pay attention, I hear my white sister's frustrations, I hear the call for the attempts for unity that the All Lives Matter hashtag is trying to do. I hear Christian women say we're all made in God's image. So I'm trying to hear both. Okay, so this isn't me coming at you like angry, or like, this isn't me. That's not my heart. But to say that But the reality is that a lot of Black moms, a lot of Black women, the Black community is suffering right now. We are so tired. We are so tired of the same narrative playing out every single time. We are sick and tired of looking at our boys and wondering, how are we failing them? We're tired. So there's suffering going on. And kingdom people, our job when we see suffering is to enter in and be a voice of wholeness. To enter in and say, I see you suffering and I want to help alleviate that. That's our call. That's what being a Shalom sister is. A woman who sees brokenness and says, how can I help? Right? Not how can I get my point across? Not how can I find enough facts? Not how can I alleviate my own discomfort because your discomfort feels really icky to me right now. So that's what I've been processing a lot. And I have been really thinking about how do I have healthy relationships with my white friends when I'm suffering like this? And what is my responsibility to them right now, if any, to help them process and understand why they're suffering? And so this morning I went walking with a white friend of mine. You know who you are, you're awesome. And we processed a lot of this. And I'm realizing that a lot of this can only really be resolved when you have authentic, real relationships with Black women in your life. Because there's just no blog post that I can write that's truly going to convey to you the depth of my sorrow right now. So if you are a white woman and you're watching this and you're wondering, what do I do? I would say, first, you need to show up. You need to show up for the Black women in your life, for the Black people in your life. Whatever that looks like. If it looks like an Instagram post, if it looks like a Facebook status, if it looks like a blog post, you need to show up. Okay? You haven't been able... It's been very easy for you to not talk about this because you don't live this. You don't look at your babies and wonder what's going to happen to them. You don't look at pictures of men who look like your father and grieve. You don't. So please show up. Show up so that we can see you and see that you're using your voice, you're using your space to say, I am here. You may feel isolated and lonely, but you're not. I'm here. Then I want you to say something. Don't worry about white-splaining. Don't worry about getting the facts right. Don't worry about saying the right thing. Say something supportive. Say, I see you. Say, I see you're suffering. You shouldn't feel this way. I'm so sorry. This is wrong. You know, one of the things that I learned in marriage, because I'm married to a man who's very different than me, one of the things that I learned is that sometimes he's going to say to me, babe, this bothers me. I don't feel good about this. You're hurting me in some way. Now, my job as a wife is to not say, well, let's unpack that so that I can affirm your pain right now. My job as his partner, because I've committed my life to him, because I live in covenant with him, and to say, I see that pain. Right now, it's not the time that we figure it out. Not right now, it's not the time we get cerebral. Right now, it's the time that we get compassionate. So say something supportive. Okay? The facts don't matter. Criminal history doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Say, I see your pain. Something supportive. You want some suggestions? There's tons of scriptures about grieving and mourning with those. There's tons of scriptures about peace. Go to Jesus. Look to his words. There's something there, I promise. Say something. Then sit. Be willing to sit with your sister and say, I'm just gonna be here. We're gonna sit in this together. We're gonna pray together. We're gonna make plans together. I see that you're suffering. Let's go have a cup of coffee. Let's just be. And let the Holy Spirit knit our hearts together and let there be some unity here. so that I can know once I am out of this highly emotional moment with you, I can know how I can continually support you, because I see you as my equal. I see you as my sister. That's all that really needs to happen right now when we're in triage, when we're hemorrhaging our grief on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Show up, say something supportive, sit with us. Now, if you don't have Black friends in your life for whatever reason, I really would encourage you to sit with Jesus and wonder why. And I don't mean that to be mean at all. I just say, if you're a woman who loves Jesus, if you're a woman who wants to follow God, if you're a woman who listens to my podcast or read my blogs and say, I want to be a Shalom sister, then honey, you need some Black friends. And if you don't have them in your real life, because it takes a while to build these authentic relationships, then look in the spaces that you hold online. Are you a part of a group where you know that there's a demographic of Black women who haven't said anything about their pain? Because see, here's the thing, and this is a fundamental thing. It's not our job to always show up and tell you we're hurting, because that's exploiting our pain. So if you're a part of a community, white sister, and you know that there's Black women there, and they've been silent about things that's going on in our country, maybe you need to ask, should I show up? Should I say something supportive? And should I create a space to sit? Those are my Shalom steps, I guess, for you, white sisters. Thanks for listening.
So I know many of us might have watched that and thought, oh, like this feels more from like my own personal life. But I can tell you as a Black person who is in predominantly and who are in Anabaptist spaces, I recognize when Anabaptist organizations are talking about this, because they're mostly white organizations, PWI, predominantly white institutions. So as leaders, and as the ones who are crafting communication strategies for organizations that are PWIs, I really do encourage you to think about, how do you be a part of crafting responses when things happen in the news that are racially charged, that show that your organization is willing to show up. Like you're willing to show up and say, we are here and we see. We're not the quiet in the land. We're not digging our head in the sand. We are not avoiding because we don't want to seem political. Like we recognize that there are humans, people who are hurt by what's going on. And so you show up on your space and say something encouraging, say something humanizing. I think one of the biggest fears that we have in kind of stepping into these conversations that feel political is that we don't want to seem like we're choosing a side, but Jesus always chose the side of the human being. Jesus always chose to humanize those who have been dehumanized. And so saying something doesn't make you political. Saying something makes you a peacemaker. It invites you into that space of saying, like, we recognize that all humans are made in the image of God, and some humans for who God loves are suffering right now. And then be still. And that usually looks like saying something supportive, and then offering an opportunity for people to comment in the comment section. And I usually, when I do that, when people post their real pain, I respond back like, I see your pain, I'm praying for your pain. When I was a part of Woodland Hills crafting their communication strategy after George Floyd died, I led them in sort of this show up, say something, be still framework by inviting them to say, like, hey, we're going to have this time of prayer, or we're going to have this vigil, this Instagram vigil online. Like I asked them to create opportunities for that, and they did. They did create opportunities for people to enter into a Zoom space or Zoom room to pray. So that might even be something as a social media strategist, as somebody who's leading the communication strategy, that might be something that you want to think about, or what are spaces that we can invite people into online to kind of help them rehumanize. And that could even look like something that I do on social media. I used to do these breath prayers every morning. I don't do them now because I'm finishing my book. But once my book is turned in, I would show up and I would lead it through a short devotion, and we would just pray. Like I would lead them through a breath prayer. So there are lots of ways to create that be still space, that space of like, let's kind of sit in what is going on in our country. There are ways to create that. But I think it's really, really important for us to kind of bring this an alternative way of having these conversations that really do lead us back to the love, that transforming love of Jesus, that casts that good news, that good vision of shalom before others as they're processing that hard thing. Because I promise you, for every one of our peacemaking centered posts, there are probably 100 angry, railing, dehumanizing posts that are really rooted in someone's pain and unprocessed trauma. But we get to be the ones that offer an alternative response to the brokenness in the world. So I'm going to give you kind of, just as I close, just 3 ways to think of peacemaking posts. First, consider the overarching ideas. First, consider your why. Why are you thinking about using social media as a part of your communication strategy? What is it about that space that is important to you and your community? Why do you want to bring this alternative, this different way of communicating online? I hope I've given you enough compelling reasons and to do that, but really consider your why. This is especially important too if your community, like if you are having the communication strategy of a school that is predominantly white, but you know that there are students of color in your community, it will be so important for them to see their school saying something about race in our country, or being intentional about diversity, intentional about celebrating the beauty of different cultures, or even having people that look like them on your social media. So if you're going to explore that, like, that might be an important why for you. So just consider your why, and even talk that over with your team. Like, why are we doing this? And here are 3 kind of posts that I usually think about whenever I'm practicing peacemaking online. Oh, it's really rooted in Hebrews 10:24. Let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds. So I'm going to skip this over, and then I'm going to go back and close with that prayer. So there are 3 kind of posts that I use. The first one is one that inspires passion. The second is one that gives purpose. And the third is one that invites others to play or to participate. So usually, and sometimes my posts will do all 3. Maybe they'll do only one, but this is kind of the framework that I think of when I am creating a post. Does it inspire passion? Like, does it inspire them towards that good picture of shalom? Is it good news for them? Does it get them excited about humanizing others? Then I'll post it. If it gives them purpose, like if it helps them identify themselves as a peacemaker, then I'll post it. And then if there's an invitation to play or participate, usually play. So like if, on Instagram, I did this thing called Black Joy Week. It was just right after those 3 news stories of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd. And there was just, the only narratives I was seeing online was of Black people suffering. And so I spent a whole week of highlighting pictures of Black joy. And beforehand, I asked people to send me pictures of their family members or of, so like just incandescently happy, like send me pictures of like what Black joy looks like to them. And it was interesting. Most of the people who sent me pictures to post during Black Joy Week were white people. It wasn't only Black people who were sending it in, but that was an invitation for them to play, to have a good time online, to not let everything that I post online be like really hard and intense conversations, but let's have a good time together or participate with some way that they can kind of share their story or engage with me online. So I kind of stagger my posts with these 3 so that it always feels like a well-rounded like place where people can come and just feel like truly human, truly connected, and get excited about the concept of being peacemakers. So as I close, I want to share with you this prayer that really has grounded all of my peacemaking practices, but specifically social media shalom. So if you'll join me as I close in prayer, and then I'm going to pray this prayer. Oh, That's not right. Just ignore that, Robin Deanna. Shalom. As I close this prayer, I'll turn it back over to Annette, but I'll be watching the chat section for any questions that might come in. All right. So, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is dying that we are born into eternal life. Amen. All right. All right, friends, go in peace to make peace online. So I'll stick around for some Q&A time.
Thank you so much, Osheta. I'm an introvert, so it takes me some time to process, and I'll be thinking about what you've shared for some time and kind of working through my own responses to that. I really appreciate your sharing and your, the way that you have encouraged us, and the way you're, challenging us to step up and to be considering how to engage. Like you said, it's not whether we engage, but how to engage, and to bring our faith and pull these things together in the public sphere, and what these things that we're saying are communicating about us, and what others are seeing and what we're communicating. So if we could shift to a time of question and answer now. Recognizing we're all taking time to just digest these different things that you have shared, Osheta. If you want to put your questions in the chat, Osheta can see them there and respond as they come in, and we'll just try to make sure that we tend to all of those there. So I think I would prefer now to do that via the chat rather than having us unmute ourselves and talking, just as a way of moderating this time better. So what questions would you have for Osheta, either personally or also professionally for your work?
Okay, so I see a question from Mike Hosletter, hope I said that right, about the role of community and peacemaking through social media. I'm assuming, actually, Michael, will you go ahead and just unmute yourself and tell me, if you can, just tell me a little bit more, because there's lots of ways I can talk about community or community building. Can you do that?
I think that building peace is not about being a lone ranger. It's about finding support within. Well, in effect, I think you sort of implied that you're building community in the former ways that you respond or interact or engage with people. Mm-hmm. The fact that you have 13,000 followers or some massive amount of people, it's impossible to be one-on-one with everybody. But nonetheless, I think as people choose to follow you, they are in effect choosing to be a part of a community that's committed to the things that you just talked about.
Yeah.
And I think there's strength in being a part of something like that. I was just curious about your experience with that. I think that peacemaking is also about being a part of a culture of, nonviolence for one, but a culture that's committed to the things that you're talking about. Because there you find strength and are able to support each other in actually carrying that out.
Yeah. So that's really good. So on my Instagram account, I have 45,000 followers. So like, there's no way I can engage with all of them, obviously. So what I do, I do certain things online that is that kind of that last post, that invitation to play or participate, because that helps me kind of whittle down who are the ones who are actually engaging with me. So when I do my breath prayers, I have a group about 100 to 150 women. 100, 150 people who show up. And so what I did with breath prayers to build community is I would sit, and as they would pop in, I would say their name. So kind of like what we did at the beginning of this, like, hi, my name's so-and-so, and I do this. Like as they were coming on, I would, just as like the pastor would greet somebody as they're coming into church, I would say like, hey, Melanie, hey, so-and-so, hey, like I would just say like, so glad you're here. That for me actually found was super helpful in building community and building loyalty, because people would then like come into my direct messages and say like, hey, I thanks for saying hi to me. It was like the high point of my day because I'm quarantining by myself and you're like the only person who like talked to me today. Or they'll tag me on something like, oh, I was on breath prayer with Osheta. She feels like she's my friend. So just me doing the work as like the one who's building this platform, like getting to know people's names and saying their names. Sometimes when I was over the summer, when things were like at its peak around the racial injustice, when people would post things, because I'm working on my book, Dear White Peacemakers, I would see what they would post and I would put it in my stories and I would call them out and say like, hey, like so-and-so, you're such a great, like, Dear White Peacemaker, thank you for posting this. So building community has really been rooted in like getting to know people and saying their name and posting their name and letting them feel like I see them in the same way that they see me. It really is like super difficult for me to build like a deep, authentic relationship with somebody who is in New Zealand. But I've been so surprised that like I have somebody who lives in New Zealand who like messages me and we chat with each other and I feel like I know her. And so for me, that's what building community looks like. I also like, am not afraid to share like things, like let people see, kind of like the video I showed you. I'm not afraid to like kind of be raw or authentic. And I think that honesty, that humanizing piece of myself, allows the community to feel like people want to build community. So like with my husband, he's a very private person. And like my one big goal for him is to get him to do like one of those like TikTok dance videos. Like that's my one big goal for him, to help us build community in our church, because I'm like, they need to see you be goofy. So like they need to see like that, like another aspect of your humanity, like not just a super awesome theologian. So like, you know, another way to build community is just to kind of like humanize your organization or the people in your organization by doing something fun or engaging that shows a different aspect of you. So good question. Anyone else? I think we're a small enough group if you want to go ahead and unmute. I think it's probably better if you feel comfortable. Laura, could you share advice surrounding how to set healthy boundaries when trying to authentically connect with social media followers who hold different, maybe harmful perspectives? Yes. So what I'm assuming you're, I'm going to share with you what I do. So I'm going to share a little bit more of my 3 back and forth rule. And if there's something a little bit more that you want me to go into, Laura, unmute and I'll dive in a little bit more. So I have this rule. So I'll post something and somebody may disagree. Okay. I like when people disagree with me. I don't like when they call me like names or whatever, but if they disagree with me, great. So a healthy boundary that I set is they get 3 interactions with me back and forth. That's either 3 in the comment section or 3 in the DM. That's the boundary I set for me. Usually I'll do like a response in the comment section because that's important for everybody to see that I'm not honoring people who disagree with me. Because I think as a peacemaker, it's important for people to see me being respectful and civil and kind to people, even if I disagree with them. So I'll usually, like, if they post something, I respond back. A little bit more of like, this is a little bit more nuance or context to something to the thing I posted that they disagree with. So an example is I posted something around the election and somebody disagreed with me. And so I went back and the first thing I always say is, hey, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts. I always say some version of that because I think it's important. People are putting their words out there. And then I just told them a little bit more of my perspective. And then I always end with, hey, if you want to keep talking, private message me. That for me signals to that's a boundary that signals to other people who are watching the thread that I'm not going to have arguments with them, and I'm not going to tolerate arguments in my thread. That's a boundary I set. So they know, other people who are looking in, they know I've invited that person to take it off. If that person keeps going in that thread, I usually reply back once and tell them, like, I'm not going to talk in this thread anymore. Come to my DMs. That's a setting a boundary. So then in the DMs, we go back, depending on where they are, this is probably their second interaction. They get 2 more back and forth with me. Then I give them my Google number if they want to talk. And if it seems to be, and this is where the discernment of the Holy Spirit really comes into play for me when I do social media. If it seems to be that person is just curious, like they're not trying to be a jerk, they're genuinely curious, and online is maybe the only space where they can explore big ideas, then I give them my Google number and I give them like a 30-minute phone conversation. And then at that point, usually at that point, we're like I have like 100% accuracy rate, honestly, with people after a phone conversation. They may not agree with me, but they're not as like angry about like the thing that I posted. And so then so those are the boundaries that I set. I model in the comment section that I'm not going to have arguments there. And then I invite people to DM space where I have more control. And then I invite them into a conversation where I can humanize them. Most of my boundary setting happens in that comment section. And I have had people comment in response to say, thanks for modeling this, or, oh, like, I appreciate your grace, or like, like, thank you for this conversation. Like, I've seen people respond to how I do that. That shows that like they recognize that I'm being authentic, I'm being honest, and I'm also setting healthy boundaries. So I hope that answered your question, Laura. Oh, another thing too, let me just say this. Because I'm a parent, and maybe some of your organizations have minors, because I'm a parent, one of the things that I do is I have a hashtag that is kid approved post. So that is a way for me to authentically share my life. Because it's my kids, but it's honoring their dignity and their agency. And so if you see me post something online and it has my kids in it, you will almost always see it as a kid approved post. And you'll see me use that hashtag because it's really, really important for people to know that I've set a boundary with my kids, that they don't get to be shown online unless they give me permission. And so like, so that's like another way that I set boundaries. So. Thanks, Laura. Oh, good. A couple good questions. Okay, so Aaron says, is there an organization or publication whose social media presence has impressed you, and what do you like about it? Okay, so if you don't mind, I'm just gonna pull up my Instagram account and see who, because off the top of my head, see who I follow that I really appreciate. Okay, so off the top of my head, PAX is an organization. Now this is like a little bit of a shameless plug because I'm the spiritual director for this organization and I'm a part of their social media strategy. But PAX is an organization that I'm a part of, and we've been intentionally thoughtful about crafting our social media to be centered on peacemaking and highlight diversity, highlight voices of people of color. I would also say the Global Immersion Project has an amazing social media presence. I really, really love everything that they put out. I love the conversations that they have. I love their commitment to peacemaking. Let's see who else I'm following that I love. Churches that I like to follow, I love to follow the Meeting House. I think they put really good stuff out. And I think that they do a really good job of kind of having that like cute, like humanizing aspect of their church, but also good theology. The Dignity Effect is a really good social media. They're on Instagram. I like them a lot. And these are all places that don't have a whole lot of followers, but I love to follow them. And then I just follow a whole slew of other like influencers. Like I'm looking right now just to make sure that I don't leave anybody out that I love. But what usually impresses me about someone who will get my follow is one, if it's beautiful content. So if it's content that that is beautiful, it's well done. I can tell that somebody has thought a little bit about how to put it out there. I really appreciate it. Oh, there's a nonprofit that if I remember, I'll put it in the chat. And the other thing is, I really appreciate, and this is probably a sign of the time, I appreciate organizations that utilize video and that utilize the stories aspect and makes reels. So I really like to actually see their work in progress as opposed to maybe see it like a static post. And so that's usually what I will, so when I open up Instagram, I usually almost always go to the stories part first to see like what people are posting there, because I get to like see their faces and in real time. I'm not always super great to be, I mean, like I love it, but I don't always do it as often as I would like, because there's a vulnerability aspect of that, like, and there's like an organization aspect of like, how do you get all the people together, especially in the year of 2020 and the COVID. So Aaron, I hope that was helpful for you. Jen, yes, I do delete comments. So I do delete comments. Usually I will delete a comment if it is attacking someone else. That is the only time I delete a comment. I don't delete a comment if they disagree with me. I don't even delete a comment if they use language that I wouldn't personally use. I only delete comments if they are attacking someone else. So for instance, I had a post go viral over the summer, and somebody posted their thoughts. They disagreed with me. I did the whole like, let's have a conversation. Then a couple of people, not a whole bunch, but a couple of people like started like ragging on this person and like telling them how wrong they are. I, in the comment section, said, this is not okay. Like, I don't want you to do this. If you continue, I'm going to delete your comments. And then they just kept like, the other person like responded to them. So it just like turned into an argument. So I deleted the whole thing. And the reason I did that was because I deeply believe that kind of violence spreads. And in order to create a nonviolent space, I get to decide what I keep there. And so I warned them, they knew it was going to happen, and their comments got deleted. There's a whole thing going on right now about like, you don't delete somebody's comments because that's emotional labor and it's disrespectful to them. But as long as I do the work of saying like, if you guys keep at it, I'm going to delete it. I almost feel like the comment mother, like the den mother, like, okay guys, stop. But so then I will delete that. Now that is actually something that you might need to talk to like your team or your board about, like what kind of comments you want to keep, because that you may have to have a different strategy based on your values and kind of the kind of conversations you have. If that's not even something you want to think about, it's 100% okay to disable comments across the board and just say like, we don't have dialogue on our online spaces. But then I would encourage you to kind of explore, like, could there be spaces that you do have dialogue? Might that be like your newsletter to invite people, or might that be like another like online space, like a Patreon or something, where you can actually have dialogue with people who are behind a paywall, who are given their information a little bit more, so they'll be more likely to be civil and uphold your peacemaking standards. Let's see. How do you take on the Anabaptist social networking Peacemaker? I'm not sure.
What made you take on the label Anabaptist? In other words, you were introduced as being a Southern Baptist, and I forget what other. And so why Anabaptist all of a sudden, or where did that come from, and what does that mean to you as you go about engaging in social networking peacemaking?
Yeah, so I have self-identified as a neo-Anabaptist for probably 15 years now. My entry point to that, well, so to back up, my dad served 2 tours in Vietnam, and he has untreated PTSD. from the war. So I've always had a posture where I knew violence had like deep effects on people, and that violence was not the way to resolve any kind of conflict. So I almost came into Anabaptism like already like, yeah, I'm nonviolent, but I wasn't really connected to Jesus. It was just, I saw it in my dad, and I wanted a theological framework that that spoke to the posture that I already had around violence. What really shifted for me was a Jesus-centered reading of the Bible. So for me, when I, in all the other spaces that I came to Faith and Assembly of God Church, and I kind of been in all these different denominations because of my parents, because of, you know, my faith journey, deconstruction, reconstruction, all that. Jesus was always like a side note, or Jesus was just this person, or this like was just and Jesus. So, you know, holiness and Jesus, fasting and Jesus, but it was like not rooted in the person of Jesus. And I actually really loved Jesus. And so I was like, help me understand why it's important for me to believe in Jesus and shape my life around him if we don't talk about him all the time. We talk about all these other things, but we don't talk about Jesus. And so starting to read Anabaptist theologians, following people like Bruxy Cavey and Greg Boyd and Brian Zahn, and reading like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, when I read Black and Mennonite, I just started to realize like, oh, I am a part of this, like my theological home is a part of the stream of believers that deeply center the life of Jesus, and that that I'm reading the Bible to Jesus and everything points back to Jesus, but Jesus is the center. And because of that, everything in my life then made, like all of my core convictions made a whole lot of sense. I love my enemy, or I have compassion and grace for somebody I disagree with, not because I want to be a good person, but because I see that in Jesus. I see Jesus healing the soldier in the Garden of Gethsemane. Like, I care about nonviolence, not because I care about my dad, which I do, but because I see Jesus being crucified in this violent way and not offering retributive violence and not using retributive anger. Like, I want to live in a way that is counter to all of the brokenness I see in the world, not because I want to be a super awesome Christian, but because I see that in Jesus. And so because of that, that has shaped so much of everything that I do in my life. And so because I am the age I am, and because I'm active on social media, that ethos has flowed into my social media platform. So that's how I came to be passionate about Anabaptist theology. Annette asks, has there been a time when an encounter interaction hasn't ended well, and how have you worked with that? I can tell you that because I set really, really good boundaries. Like I said, if it gets all the way to that phone conversation, I've never had it end where like they were super angry with me. If I see things kind of spinning out, I shut it down. And then I've had to grow a thick skin. So I've shut conversations down, and then I've had somebody come and like message me like, why'd you shut me down? Like, you don't care. And I've had to kind of grow a thick skin around that. But I think because of the way that I built my platform from the beginning, because of the things people know about me, and because I'm really explicit about like how the spaces I am a part of are going to be deeply nonviolent, deeply full of love, committed to like humanizing each other. I think when things start to spin out, people expect me to shut it down. And so I don't have a lot of interactions that end horribly, because I kind of get them before they get to that place of being really bad. Now, I will say this: I have an 18-year-old who is really worried about my upcoming book, because he's worried that we're going to be doxxed and all those kinds of things. So that is actually something that I'm thinking about, of like, okay, how do I put this book out in the world that's rooted on the Sermon on the Mount, that's encouraging white people to be allies, that is building on this ethic of peacemaking and talking about racism? How do I put this book out in the world, and what kind of online interactions am I going to have because of that? So I'm actively thinking about like, do I need to kind of up my boundaries, or like, what do I need to do in order to continue being a peacemaker online, because I don't want to leave that space. That space has been so helpful and so meaningful for me in building authentic connection and inspiring people to be peacemakers. Jeannie says or asks, what's my next book about? My next book is called Dear White Peacemakers, and it's an encouragement to people who want to be a part of the anti-racism conversation, but are afraid or have a lot of questions. It's also for people who self-identify as allies, or that they're trying to do the work, but they feel really weary and overwhelmed. And it's rooted in the Sermon on the Mount. And so what does Jesus' teachings on the Sermon on the Mount speak to us as we engage with anti-racism, and specifically speak to white people as they're now like having these conversations around race that feel difficult? And so it addresses things like white fragility, white supremacy, and those kind of like things that you kind of hear. How do we like think about it through our Anabaptist peacemaking framework? So that's what Dear White Peacemakers is about. Okay. Jake says, recently I've heard online comments and speech referred to as violence. Specifically, if someone feels silenced or attacked during an online debate, they'll refer to it as violent language. Do you use the term violence with regard to speech? Why or why not? Yes, I do. Yes, I do. Because I think out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And I also think that our words have power, our words have meaning. And so there is an emphasis on the importance of how we use our words in scripture. And so I do think that language can be violent. I personally don't ascribe to telling somebody, like calling somebody out and saying that that language was violent, unless I have kind of built that into, unless I give a little bit more context. So I am 1000% against call out culture unless there's an element of calling in. So if I do want to say like, yes, I think that that the language you use is violent language, I will then take the time in that comment to explain, this is what I mean by violence, or like, this is how your words have contributed to harm. I think oftentimes, Jake, what you're talking about is usually somebody who will do a flyby call out, but don't really have like an element of calling in. And this is why, to be 100% honest, if something happens, I am one of the last people to post anything, because I have to do my own work first of like, what's my why, and why am I and how am I going to do this? And am I in a healthy place to actually like shepherd these people through this process to understand like what's going on? And if I'm not at that place, you won't see me in comment threads. You won't see me post about it. If you see me post something, it's because I'm ready to explain what I mean by like a word. So if I use a word like violence, or if I use a word like white fragility, I'm in a space where I'm willing to kind of explain that to you and go back and forth. And then specifically, if someone feels silenced during or attacked during an online debate, they'll, yep. So I think that, one thing that I have had to learn is there's like online engagement, Osheta, that's like interacting back and forth, and then there's like influencer Osheta who's like posting something. So I'll post something and I'm pretty sure like it might be not controversial, it might spark conversation. Then I have to know like there's online Osheta, which means like I'm flipping from like my prophetic voice to like my now pastoral voice. And so like when I am in that space and somebody says like, I feel attacked by what you said, that activates a different part of me. Then I'm no longer being prophetic, I'm being pastoral. So I'm like, help me understand why you're feeling attacked, or how did she feel silenced, or like, that's where I kind of try to do that work. That's why people only get like 3 back and forths with me, because in the same way as a pastor in real life, I set boundaries, like I do that online too. So that's kind of like the flip that I do. Aaron, good question. How often do you take social media breaks and how long do they last? I take them as much as I need them, and they last as long as I need them to. I don't have like a set, like, oh, it's always going to be the third Saturday of this month. When I do my editorial calendar and I kind of look at like, hey, I want to make sure I post about this organization, or hey, I'm speaking at this place, I want to make sure I post that. I kind of look at that and then I say, okay, like what in my real life is going to be taxing and like need me to focus in on my like the real people in my life. So then I usually at that point I just will put in like I'm not posting on Tuesday through Friday because I'm focusing in on my real life. But I don't always announce that because people don't like, they don't love when you post like every week, taking a break. The times that I do post, like I'm taking a break, is usually after like a hard season of posting. So when George Floyd was murdered, I posted like nearly every day because I was at different rallies or I was bringing new information forward because it was here in my city. So I was posting maybe like 7 or 8 days. So then I rested and I let people know like I'm resting. This book writing process has been the hardest book writing process I've ever gone through because of COVID, because of the content, all that. So I posted like, hey, I'm resting. I spent some time, writing. So I usually like, it's in response to my real life. And that's part of that authentically sharing is I'll tell people like, hey, it's been a hard couple of weeks. I'm taking some time off. As an organization though, you might want to, like I'm a part of Be the Bridge for Racial Healing. And what Latasha does in her group is every Saturday is rest. And so in that group, she has the same graphic and she puts it up and she says, like, it's time to rest. I'm a part of Check Your Privilege, and every Sunday is rest, Sunday or Monday, I can't remember, but she puts up the same graphic. And so she, like, this graphic is up, she's encouraging the whole community to rest. So as a, like, if you're thinking like like for an organization, you might want to say like, like Sunday is our rest day or whatever, and you have the same graphic. That way you're building like community, like you're building a community knowledge, and you all have the same language, and they all like are like there's a rhythm. They expect certain things from you, and they expect you to remind them to rest on certain days. Oh, another great organization to follow, Aaron, is Sacred Ordinary Days. They're really, really good. I like them a lot. Do you have certain times of the day you turn off social media notifications and stop responding to messages? I heard somebody the other day say they haven't heard their ringtone in 5 years because their phone is on silent all the time. That's a little bit how it is. The only person whose ringtone I have heard in like the past 3 years is my husband's, because I really like his ringtone and I never want to miss a call from him. So I don't get notifications on my phone. Because everything is turned off. So if I do pick up my phone, like when I'm done here, I'm going to pick up my phone and move to another room to work. That's when I'll probably like look down at my phone and see that I have notifications. And because I know like I'm not going to work on social media right now, I don't feel compelled to like respond back. I do have this thing though that is part of me, like not defining my worth with my posts, is if I post something, I immediately put my phone away, like in another room, and I go do something else. I'll leave my phone for 2-3 hours. And maybe as a social media manager or strategist, that might not be something you want to do. This is like a personal thing because you want to have that online engagement. So if I post something for PAX, I'll probably sit and pay attention because PAX's followers are going to want to know like they're responsive. But for my own personal thing, if I post something, I put it away and then I come back and respond. And then because I want to be able to respond from like a refreshed place and not like a needy, like, validate me with your comments and your likes space. So that's just something I personally do. And people don't seem to like, they'll still like respond to you if you reply, an hour later as opposed to a minute later. They just want to be seen. Okay, so Mike says, I'm taking a course in anti-racism at the moment where the instructor's rhetoric is often of the when you stop beating your spouse variety. Okay. This person says that anyone who is not actively anti-racist is racist, and you cannot be non-racist. One is either in the face of racists or a co-conspirator. She speaks from a perspective of deep personal trauma and hurt, but makes it difficult for pale, stale male to engage. Are there any male authors who take a posture similar to yours? I mean, Greg Boyd takes a posture similar to mine in terms of anti-racism. Just on a little side note, I have a personal thing. I don't call white people racist. That's not a part of any anti-racism class I teach, and I explicitly talk about that in my book because that word has so much baggage, and I don't want anything tied to my white brothers and sisters other than beloved. So I can understand how that can be really frustrating for you, Mike. Any other male authors who take a posture similar to yours? I don't know if you're asking male men of color or just male in general, but I mean, if you're looking for a man who has my same posture, I would say Greg Boyd. And Brian Zahn has a very similar posture to mine. If you're looking for a person of color, I think, I'm trying to think. I mean, I would say the closest is Jamar Tisby, but I think Jamar Tisby has, like, he uses language of like white people can be racist. I don't ascribe to that idea of calling white people racist. So, Mike, if you want to email me, I think my email is just my first name @gmail. If you want to email me some more thoughts about that, I can share a little bit more, but I have to think on your question a little bit more. Okay, Annette says, some of us work in schools with minors or parents. Can you say more? Yes. I love this question, Annette. Okay, so the church my husband pastors, we have a lot of small families, and I serve as a pastor alongside him in that capacity too. So I serve as community life pastor. So what I did, because we have a lot of like super cute small babies, and we have a lot of we have a lot of diversity in our church, and so what I did, was I set up a consent form ahead of time, especially when everything moved to, Drew Hart's a really good person too, Melanie. When everything moved to online, I wrote like a simple kind of photo media consent form, and I put it on Google Docs, and I just sent the link out to all of them and asked them if they didn't mind their children being shared, their pictures being shared, to go ahead and fill it out. We also have a community page where a lot of those families will post like cute little pictures of their kids. That's not something that they've posted in other places. They just have posted for their church community to see. But like, for instance, we have one of our leaders wanted to surprise her nephew, and so going to the museum to see dinosaurs, but then our governor closed museums, and so she was like, what can I do? And our church kind of all pitched in money to buy her this like huge T-Rex costume, and she like went to his house and played like the We Are the Dinosaur song, and she like got out of the car as a dinosaur and like surprised her nephew, and it was all recorded. But that was like something she shared with our community, because she was like, thanks guys for making this happen. So like I messaged her and was like, hey, can you check with your sister and see like, can we share that video over on our Instagram, because that is like really funny and super cute, and it like shows like another aspect of our church. I'm still waiting for permission from that, but that's kind of how I manage that. And so like that's kind of how I have figured that out. I will tell you, my children are biracial, and so they're culturally ambiguous. So people want pictures of them. At every church we've been in, people have wanted pictures of them. And we had a church take a picture of our child and post it on their new church plants page. Like, we've never even been to that church plant. We barely even knew the planters, but because they had a picture of my kid from VBS, they posted on that, and we didn't sign a consent form on that. So it was like really surprising, like 2 years later to like see this church plant like promote their church and see my daughter's picture like on a lot of their promotion, and they didn't ask permission or anything like that. So as a parent, I can think like having that agency and having the organization like invite me into that conversation is really important, especially as a parent of color. It really frustrated me that I wasn't asked. And so yeah, if you can come up with something like that, I think that would be super, super helpful. And yeah. And also like, and if you don't have the media for, like, it gets really tricky too. Like if you have like a really great picture, but like not everybody has a media form, then you might have to do a little bit more work to get that consent. But then, like that's just a practice of peacemaking. You have humanized and heard every single person in that picture. And then when it goes up, it's really like a good celebration of your organization. It's not like, oh, we posted this because it makes us look really good, but there might be some hurt feelings, when they see that picture. And then also like if they're online too, like say like, can we tag you? That's another thing that we included on that media request, that media consent form is it okay if we tag you on your social media? Like there's one person in our church who's a lawyer, and so she's like totally okay sharing pictures of my kids, just don't tag me. Like don't tag me. And we're like, okay, cool. Of course, Annette. I will say too, though, Melanie, Drew Hartz has a very similar posture to mine, but I don't know his stance on the whole like racism, like that aspect of it. But he does have he calls himself an anti-Blacktivist, so he is very much in the stream of like Howard Thurman, like very much in the stream of like I'm a peacemaker, but I also am doing this work of activism from a peacemaking posture. Katie Hurst says, I work at a school, thoughts on bridging the gap between an older, more potentially conservative alumni donor base and current students younger who want to hear more from their school RE topics, about topics and race, etc. I think one of the best things you can do is let your students of color tell their story. So if you can come up with some sort of media campaign or some way of allowing them to tell their story, it could be highlighting them, it could be whatever, like there are hundreds of ways, and I trust the creativity of you and your team to come up with it. But I think stories will always change the dynamic of a conversation. And so if you can make space for your students or your alumni, especially those of color, to share their story, I think that will begin to bridge the gap. So then this is a little like, like a little like strategy piece, but then you can have a time where you highlight their stories, but then you can maybe say like, because we care about so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and students like them, we are going to have more conversations about immigration or whatever. So you might see a post coming down, now here's a post written by somebody on immigration because we want to respond to the stories of so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. Now you're going to get pushback. That's part of it. That's the thing we've signed up for, especially if you kind of wade into these waters. But God's troubling these waters. God is in the midst of these conversations. And so we can't avoid having them. So it's okay, like be prepared for the pushback, but like, if you can utilize stories, if you can allow leaders of color, people of color to kind of lead you in starting these conversations, I think that might do a lot to help bridge that gap. And then it really is rooted in like a peacemaking love ethic and not just a like, hi, we want to just like highlight these people of color because we want to, because like that's what everybody says we should be doing, but like we want to highlight them because their voice matters, their stories matters, and we as an organization want to make space for them so they feel that they belong. Laura says, similar question. I think many of our organizations have a broad spectrum of constituents. Talking is hard. How do we communicate our faith? For example, standing up for the marginalized people we serve in a way that calls in each of our followers. Often it feels like we're too conservative for friends. Okay, yeah, we're too conservative for some followers and too progressive for others. Welcome to being an Anabaptist. how do we communicate in a way that opens doors for meaningful conversation online among people who have very different perspectives? It really is, you really have to know, you really have to know that different forums, different online spaces, different platforms can hold different things. That's what I'm saying. So you might want to say, well, we're not going to do a whole lot of calling out on Twitter, because Twitter might not be the space where we can do that. Like, we can't be pastoral in that conversation. We can probably assign somebody to moderate a Facebook conversation. So we're going to like post a video or post a story and invite conversation over there. Maybe we can do that on Instagram, or like maybe we're going to set up a Patreon where we can do this, or maybe we're going to do a Substack, or like, so look at the different platforms you have and ask yourself, how can we show up in our fullest, most authentic, most loving way in these spaces? And what can these spaces hold? Like, what can these spaces actually hold? For me, Twitter has been a really good space of letting people know, like, a quick idea. I will never expect Twitter to allow me to be as pastoral as I want to be. And so just knowing the different platforms that you have, and knowing what you can hold, and knowing the people that you've entrusted into those spaces, knowing their capacity, will kind of help you figure out how to wade into some of these conversations. All right, so I think we're at 3:00. So I'm going to turn it back over to Matt.
Yeah, thank you so much, Osheta, for sharing. This conversation is wonderful, and I'm sure we could go on for quite a while about it, and we will have some more time for discussion. I know you need to leave, but appreciate all of the time that you've given to us. It's been really great. And now everyone, make sure you go follow her on Instagram so we can keep up with everything. Yeah, really appreciate you being here for that. We are going to move into a break time here. I think there's going to be some slides of information on the screen.